The clock ticked louder than usual that morning, echoing through the hollow silence of the house that once held laughter, warmth, and love. I sat at the edge of the dining table, staring at my husband's empty chair. The sunlight slipped through the half-closed blinds, cutting faint golden lines across the mahogany wood. My trembling hands traced the coffee cup he used to hold every morning. Black coffee, no sugar, no cream. He used to say life was better without pretenses. But that life ended the day his heart gave out, leaving me alone in a house that suddenly felt too large for one soul. People came and went during the funeral. My son, David, stood by his wife's side, his expression distant, distracted. She, Melissa, was polished, perfect, and cold as marble. Even then, I could tell she wasn't mourning my husband. She was calculating. Every glance toward me carried the weight of quiet judgment. When she thought I wasn't looking, she whispered things to David that made him frown. My son tried to balance between us, but grief and guilt twisted him in ways I could see even through the tears. Weeks passed and the calls grew fewer. The once frequent Sunday dinners faded into silence. The only sound that lingered was the ticking clock and the rustle of mail on the counter, mostly bills and condolence cards from people who had already moved on. My husband, Richard, had left behind a modest estate. The house, his savings, and, I believed, a plan for us all. He had always been the steady hand that kept the family whole. Without him, the cracks began to show. One chilly afternoon, I received a formal letter, an invitation to the reading of Richard's will. It was to be held at his attorney's office downtown, a place filled with memories of business meetings and paper signed over decades. I felt a flicker of anxiety as I read the letter again. The meeting was scheduled for Friday at 10 in the morning. My husband had never spoken much about his finances. He believed that trust should outlive him. I trusted him with my life, but I wasn't so sure about the people who now surrounded me. The morning of the reading, I dressed carefully. I wore a dark navy dress, the same one I had worn to our 40th anniversary dinner. I pinned the silver brooch Richard had given me the night he proposed. It wasn't about vanity. It was about memory. I looked in the mirror, smoothing my white hair into a neat bun. "You can do this, Evelyn," I whispered to my reflection. When I arrived, the lobby smelled faintly of old books and fresh coffee. The lawyer's assistant greeted me kindly, her tone soft as though I might break. "Mrs. Caldwell, they're already inside," she said with a small smile. "Already? Inside?" I felt a strange tension in my chest as I walked down the corridor toward the conference room. I could hear voices, Melissa's sharp tones slicing through the air, David's hushed responses. Then came laughter, but not the warm kind, the kind that hides something cruel beneath its polish. When I stepped through the door, the room fell quiet for a moment. The long oak table was surrounded by my family, David, my daughter-in-law, Melissa, and their teenage son, Ethan. The lawyer, Mr. Harrison, sat at the head of the table with his reading glasses perched low on his nose. Melissa was the first to speak. Her voice was sweet, but coated in venom. "Oh, you came." I smiled faintly, refusing to let her rattle me. Of course, Richard would have wanted me here. She tilted her head, crossing her legs as if she owned the room. "Well," she said lightly, "this is more of a family matter." The words stung, but I remained calm. "And I am family," I said softly. David shifted in his chair. "Mom, please, let's just—" But before he could finish, Melissa cut him off. "Honestly, Evelyn, you don't really belong here. Richard's assets were, well, complicated. You don't need to trouble yourself with all of this." Her words sliced deeper than she knew. Not belong? This house, this family, my life were built alongside that man. Every meal, every bill, every tear. I wanted to respond, to defend myself, but something in me refused to let anger win. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat, his old eyes glinting with restrained irritation. "If we could begin," he said, shuffling the papers before him. "Mrs. Caldwell most certainly does belong here. Richard made that very clear in his instructions." Melissa's smile froze. "Oh, did he?" The lawyer adjusted his glasses and began reading. "This is the last will and testament of Richard Caldwell." As his voice filled the room, I stared at the photo of Richard on the nearby wall. His gentle smile, his steady eyes. I felt his presence, calm and strong. He always had a plan. And as the reading continued, I could sense that today, even from beyond, he wasn't going to let anyone erase me.
Mr. Harrison's voice carried the gravity of years spent handling families torn between love and greed. He unfolded the paper slowly, adjusting his glasses as the room settled into tense silence. The only sound was the faint hum of the ceiling fan and the rustle of legal pages. My heart thumped steadily in my chest, half in grief, half in fear of what was about to unfold. "To my beloved wife, Evelyn," he began, his tone soft yet commanding, "who has stood beside me through every storm and every victory. I leave the house at Willow Lane, along with all its contents, to be kept as long as she wishes to live there." I felt my throat tighten. The house, our home, was still mine. I could breathe again. But across the table, Melissa's painted smile faltered. Her fingers tightened around her designer purse, the glittering rings on her hand catching the light like tiny knives. Mr. Harrison continued, "To my son, David, I leave the Caldwell Trust Fund, provided he fulfills the terms stated herein." David looked puzzled. "Terms?" he murmured. Melissa leaned forward. "Terms? What terms could there possibly be?" The lawyer cleared his throat again and glanced toward me, as if anticipating the storm to come. "Richard's instructions were very specific. David will have access to the trust fund only after ensuring his mother's comfort, care, and well-being. He is to visit her regularly and maintain the family home as a place of connection, not convenience." Melissa's face flushed red. "That's absurd," she blurted. "Why should our financial future depend on her?" David's jaw tightened. "Melissa, please," he whispered, but his voice wavered with embarrassment. Mr. Harrison's expression remained neutral. "Your husband's father made his intentions clear, Mrs. Caldwell. This wasn't about money. It was about respect." The air in the room thickened. My hands, folded neatly on my lap, trembled ever so slightly. For years, I had watched this family drift apart, each person chasing comfort while forgetting where it all began. Richard had noticed too. Even in his last days, he'd spoken of wanting to leave behind more than assets. He wanted to leave behind a message. The lawyer continued reading. "To my grandson, Ethan, I leave my collection of books and journals. On one condition, he must spend one weekend each month with his grandmother learning about the family history and documenting her stories." Ethan's head snapped up. His youthful bravado melted into a flicker of guilt. "Wait, Grandpa said that." The lawyer nodded. "Indeed he did. He wrote, and I quote, 'Family is not measured by inheritance, but by the memories we preserve together.'" For a long moment, silence filled the room again. Melissa shifted in her seat, clearly fighting to maintain composure. She shot me a look, a mixture of disbelief and disdain. But I stayed still, holding my breath, refusing to let her see the small, victorious tremor in my heart. When the lawyer finished reading the formalities, he looked up and smiled faintly. "Mr. Caldwell also left a personal letter. It's addressed to you, Evelyn." He handed me an envelope sealed with my husband's neat handwriting. My eyes blurred as I traced the familiar ink. Richard always had such steady hands. I opened the letter slowly, the paper soft and aged beneath my fingertips. My dearest Evelyn, it began. If you're reading this, I've gone ahead of you for now. I know you must be sitting in that office, feeling small in a room that doesn't deserve you. But let me tell you something, my love. You belong there more than anyone else. Everything we built, everything I earned carries your touch. The house, the family, the memories, all of it began with you. My tears came quietly, landing on the paper like gentle rain. You have given more than they will ever understand, and one day they will see that. Don't let anyone tell you that you don't belong. This world, this family, and this life were shaped by your strength. The room blurred as I folded the letter back into its envelope. The silence was heavy. Even Melissa didn't dare speak. Finally, Mr. Harrison said gently, "There's one more clause. Mr. Caldwell requested that the family gather at the house next Sunday. He's arranged for a recorded message to be played. He said it would clear the air once and for all." Melissa scoffed. "A message? How dramatic." But I could see her eyes flicker with unease. My husband had always been a quiet man, but when he spoke, people listened. David nodded reluctantly. "We'll be there," he said, though his tone was uncertain. As the meeting ended, I gathered my purse and the letter, tucking it close to my heart. Melissa walked ahead, heels clicking against the marble floor like tiny hammers. As she reached the door, she turned slightly, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Enjoy your house, Evelyn. I hope it keeps you warm when you're alone." I smiled softly, my eyes steady. "It's warmer than you think," I replied. She blinked, unsure whether to take it as kindness or defiance. I didn't wait for her to decide. As I stepped into the cold autumn air, a gust of wind swept through the streets, carrying the scent of fading leaves and rain. The city moved on, indifferent to my small victory, but inside me, something shifted. Richard's voice lingered, whispering through the letter and the rustle of the trees. "You belong here." That night I sat by the window, the will still fresh in my mind. For the first time since his passing, I felt him near, not as a ghost of the past, but as a guardian of the future. Next Sunday would bring more revelations. I could feel it in my bones. Melissa might think this was over, but my husband had always known how to set the stage, and I was ready for the next act.
The following Sunday, the house on Willow Lane looked both familiar and foreign. The ivy on the walls had grown thicker, curling over the brick like time itself was trying to reclaim what was once ours. I stood by the front door, my fingers tracing the handle Richard had polished so many times. The air was still, heavy with the scent of oak and distant rain. Inside, everything was as he'd left it. His reading chair, the framed photos, the worn rug that held the echoes of years gone by. But the silence had weight. It wasn't the peace of solitude. It was the pause before something important, something that would shift the ground beneath us all. By noon, the family arrived. David first, his shoulders tense and eyes darting between the walls as though afraid to meet the memories that hung there. Behind him came Melissa, her perfume arriving a moment before she did, sharp, expensive, and cold. Ethan followed, hands in his pockets, pretending to scroll his phone to avoid the tension building in the air. "Nice to see the house still standing," Melissa said dryly, setting her bag down on the table. I smiled politely. "It's held up better than most people I know." Her smirk faltered. For a moment, the only sound was the clock ticking above the fireplace. Mr. Harrison arrived soon after, carrying a small black briefcase and an envelope. "Good afternoon, everyone," he said warmly, his eyes softening when they met mine. "Richard left something for today's gathering." He opened the briefcase and pulled out a small video player, a sleek device with a single button. He placed it on the table, its presence commanding silence. Your husband wanted this message to be played exactly 1 week after the will reading. Melissa crossed her arms. This is ridiculous. What could he possibly say that wasn't already said in the will? I didn't answer. My hands rested quietly on the armrest, but inside, my heart beat like a drum. Mr. Harrison pressed play. The screen flickered to life, and there he was, Richard, sitting in his study, wearing his favorite navy sweater. His hair was grayer than I remembered, but his eyes still held that calm strength that had carried me through every hardship. "Hello, my family," he began, his voice warm yet deliberate. "If you're watching this, it means I've taken my leave from this world. But before you all go your separate ways, there are things I need to say." Melissa sighed dramatically, but her expression tightened as he continued. "I know there's been distance among us. Evelyn, my love, I know how lonely it's been since I fell ill. David, you've done your best to balance work and family, but somewhere along the way, you forgot that love isn't measured in visits or phone calls. It's measured in presence. And Melissa," he paused, "you are strong and ambitious, but strength without humility can turn to cruelty. I hope you remember that." Melissa's eyes widened, her posture stiffened as if every word hit like a wave she didn't see coming. Ethan leaned forward, captivated. Richard continued, his tone softening. "This home was built not of bricks, but of sacrifice. When you see these walls, I want you to remember the hands that cleaned them, the nights Evelyn stayed awake while I worked late, the meals she made when there was barely enough to share. You all stand where you are because of her." I felt tears forming again. My fingers clutched the letter in my pocket, the same one from the will reading. "Evelyn," he said, his voice tender, "you gave me a lifetime of grace. You belong here, and no one has the right to tell you otherwise." The silence that followed was almost unbearable. Melissa shifted in her seat, her lips parting as if to speak, but no sound came. Richard wasn't done. "David," he said, "I left you the trust fund because I believe in your potential. But don't let wealth make you forget your roots. If you want to honor me, take care of your mother. She won't ask for it, but she deserves it." He turned slightly in his chair, looking toward where Ethan would have stood. "And Ethan," he said, "life will test you, but the stories of those before you will guide you. Learn them. Write them, carry them forward." The screen went black. For a long moment, no one moved. Even the clock ticking seemed to stop, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Finally, Ethan whispered, "He really loved you, Grandma." I smiled faintly. He loved us all, even when we forgot how to love each other. Melissa stood abruptly. "Well, I suppose that's that. Are we done here?" Mr. Harrison raised an eyebrow. "Actually, there's a final note." He pulled out a small sealed envelope and handed it to Melissa. Her hands trembled as she tore it open. She scanned the letter, her color draining as she read. "What is this?" Mr. Harrison explained gently. "Richard requested that a donation be made in your name, Mrs. Caldwell, to the women's shelter downtown. He wanted to remind you that kindness begins with empathy." Melissa froze, speechless. David looked at me, shame softening his features. "Mom, I'm sorry. I should have been around more. I didn't know." I stopped him with a small shake of my head. "You know now. That's enough." For the first time, the air between us felt lighter. Not perfect, not healed, but human again. Mr. Harrison packed up the video player and stood. "Your husband loved his family deeply, and today he reminded us why." As the sun dipped behind the willow trees, golden light filled the room, casting warm shadows on the family portraits. Richard's smile beamed from every frame, a silent reassurance that his message had landed where it was meant to. Melissa stayed quiet as they left, her usual sharpness replaced with something uncertain. Maybe reflection, maybe regret. When the last car pulled away, I sat by the fireplace, the embers glowing softly. The house no longer felt empty. It felt alive again, with memory, forgiveness, and peace. And as the wind whispered through the curtains, I could almost hear Richard's voice, faint but certain. You belonged here all along, Evelyn.
The days after the will reading were a blur of soft rain and long silences. The house had never felt so still, yet somehow it seemed to hum with Richard's words, like the walls themselves were whispering his message back to me. Every morning, I sat at the kitchen table with my tea, the same spot where he used to read the paper. The steam rose gently from the cup, curling like memories into the air. Outside, the garden looked wild, untouched, yet alive, the roses leaning against the fence as though listening for something. I wasn't sure what to do with myself. The letter from Richard still sat on the table, the edges now worn from how many times I'd unfolded it. Each word, each phrase carried a warmth I couldn't let go of. But peace never lasts long when guilt lingers in the air. It started with a knock at the door. Soft, hesitant. When I opened it, Melissa stood there. No makeup this time, no designer coat, just a simple cardigan and tired eyes that looked nothing like the woman who'd dismissed me at the lawyer's office. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly. I nodded and stepped aside. She hesitated in the doorway, her eyes darting around the house as if rediscovering it. She laughed softly, the first sound of warmth I had heard from her in years. "He really loved you." "Yes," I said, looking toward the framed photo on the mantel. "He did, and he loved you too, in his way. He believed in family, even when it broke his heart." Melissa's shoulders slumped. "I don't know what to say. What I said that day, it was cruel. I just thought that I didn't belong anymore," I finished gently. She nodded, tears forming. "I was angry. I thought everything was slipping through my fingers. The business was struggling, David was distant, and then this will changed everything. I thought if I could just hold on to what was left, I could keep us safe." Her voice cracked, and I felt a wave of sympathy I didn't expect. "Melissa," I said softly, "safety doesn't come from holding on to things. It comes from knowing when to let them go." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The clock ticked, the house creaked, and the soft rain began again outside. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," she said, finally. "Maybe not, but forgiveness isn't something we earn. It's something we give when we're ready." She looked up, startled by the kindness in my tone. I saw the woman behind the pride, tired, lost, and just trying to make sense of it all. "I'll start by making things right," she said suddenly, pulling out a folded envelope from her purse. I went to the shelter Richard mentioned. I met some of the women there. They told me what the donation meant to them. I want to keep helping, in his memory." My chest tightened with emotion. "He'd be proud of you for that." She smiled, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Maybe one day I can be too." After she left, I stood by the window, watching her car disappear down the road. For the first time in a long while, I felt something shift. Not just in her, but in me too. Maybe this was the real inheritance Richard left us. Not money, not land, but the courage to face ourselves. That evening, David called. His voice was softer than usual. "Mom, I was thinking, maybe we could all have dinner this weekend, at the house. Melissa wants to cook." I almost didn't believe him. "Here? In this house?" He chuckled nervously. "Yeah,
I think Dad would like that. When Saturday came, I set the table the way Richard loved. Candles in the center, mismatched napkins he'd never let me replace. Melissa arrived early, carrying a casserole dish that smelled like heaven and humility. David followed, holding flowers. Ethan helped me arrange them in a vase, smiling the whole time. When we sat down to eat, the conversation was awkward at first. Small talk, nervous laughter, but it slowly found its rhythm. David told stories from work, Ethan shared his writing, and Melissa listened, really listened. Halfway through dinner, she looked up at me and said, "You know, Richard was right. You built this family. We just forgot how much of you was holding it together." I felt my throat tighten. He built it with me. I just never stopped believing it was worth saving. For the first time, the house didn't feel haunted by what was lost. It felt alive with what was found. Forgiveness, connection, the fragile threads of love stitching themselves back together. Later that night, after everyone left, I walked into the study, the place where Richard filmed his message. The light from the window fell across his desk, and something caught my eye. A small brass key resting beside the family photo. I picked it up, a note tucked beneath it in his handwriting. "For when you're ready to open one more door." The key glimmered in my palm, mysterious yet familiar. Another secret, another message from beyond. And for the first time in months, I smiled. "All right, Richard, let's see what you've left me this time."
The next morning, sunlight spilled across the wooden floors, painting golden streaks across the quiet house. The little brass key sat on my nightstand, glinting like it held the weight of the past and the promise of something still unfinished. I turned it over in my hand, feeling the grooves, the warmth it carried. Richard had always loved surprises, especially the kind that taught lessons. I knew this key wasn't random. It meant something. I walked through the house slowly, each step echoing softly. My fingers brushed the edges of old photo frames. The wedding picture from 1972, David's graduation photo, the family portrait from the first Christmas in this house. Each image told a story, our story. And then I stopped in front of Richard's study door. It was locked. A breath caught in my throat. For months, I hadn't been able to go inside. After he passed, the lawyer had said everything important was handled. His will, his documents, his affairs. But somehow the door had remained closed, like he wanted it that way. My hand trembled as I slid the key into the lock. It turned smoothly, with a quiet click, like the sound of a chapter opening. The door creaked as it swung inward. Dust motes floated through the sunlight, dancing in the still air. The scent hit me instantly. Leather-bound books, cedarwood, and something that felt like him. I stepped inside. On his desk sat a small wooden box, the same one he'd kept since our early years. Beside it lay another envelope, addressed in his familiar handwriting. "For Evelyn when you're ready to let go, but not forget." My fingers trembled as I unfolded the letter. "My dearest Evelyn, if you're reading this, it means you found the key, and that means you've begun to heal. You've always been the heart of this family, even when they didn't see it. But I want you to remember something important. Love isn't measured by what people say in the moment. It's measured by what they carry from you long after you're gone. Inside this box, you'll find something I hope brings you peace. It's not money or land or anything you can spend. It's a piece of us, a reminder that everything we built still lives on. Your strength has always been quiet, Evelyn, but it's what holds everything together. So when the world tries to push you aside, remember, the last word was never theirs to give. It was always yours. Love always, Richard." Tears blurred my vision.
I opened the box carefully. Inside was a collection of letters, each labeled in Richard's handwriting. One for every member of the family. For David, for Melissa, for Ethan, and one that read simply, "For the next generation." At the very bottom, a smaller note rested beneath the stack. "Evelyn, these are yours to deliver, but do it in your time, not theirs." For a long time, I sat there, holding the box, letting the silence fill the room. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I laughed through my tears. "Always the planner, Richard," I whispered. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I called the family again. I asked them to come over, not for dinner this time, but for something more important. They arrived quietly, unsure of why I'd called. The living room was filled with soft candlelight and the faint smell of Richard's favorite tea. The box sat in the middle of the table. "This," I began, my voice steady but full of emotion, "is Richard's final gift." David frowned slightly. "I thought the will covered everything." I smiled. "It did, but this isn't about possessions. It's about what we leave behind when all that's gone." One by one, I handed them their envelopes. Melissa hesitated before opening hers, glancing at me nervously. I nodded. As they read, silence fell again. Not heavy, but sacred. Melissa wiped her tears, David's shoulders shook, and Ethan smiled faintly, clutching his letter like something precious. When they looked up, something in the room had changed. The tension, the guilt, the regret, it all seemed to dissolve. Ethan was the first to speak. He said he was proud of me, even when I failed. He said he reminded me of you, Grandma. Melissa took a deep breath. She told me to stop trying to replace what can't be replaced and to start loving what's still here. David's eyes glistened. He said I've spent too long chasing success and not enough time remembering who taught me what strength looks like. I smiled softly. He always had a way with words. When the night ended, they hugged me, really hugged me, not out of guilt or duty, but from something deeper. And in that moment, I knew Richard's plan had worked. After everyone left, I sat by the window looking up at the night sky. The stars shimmered faintly, like tiny echoes of the past. I held the last unopened letter, the one marked "For the next generation." I didn't open it. Not yet. Some gifts, I thought, are meant to wait until the right time. I placed the box back on the shelf, beside Richard's photo. His smile in that picture seemed a little warmer now, as if he knew I'd understand the message he left behind. This house, this life, wasn't just a memory anymore. It was a legacy. And as I turned off the lights and walked to my room, I whispered one last thing into the quiet. "Thank you, Richard, for giving me the last word."